time for the Severe MMA preview show with Sean Sheehan, Spencer Kite, Harry Powell, and your host, Ian O'Neill.
That's right, we're here again, and my name is Ian O'Neill, and as always, I am joined by my boys Spencer Kite and Harry Powell, and we are here to break down the UFC on ABC 3 and the main event between Brian Ortega and Yair Rodriguez in the featherweight division. But first, before we get into all the action, let me introduce you guys to our great sponsors, and that's All Real Nutrition Bars. Head on over to eatallreal.com, enter the code word SevereMMA, and get yourself 15% off those delicious bars. UFC on ABC3. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, guys? But look, we have a good card ahead of ourselves, and this main event is absolutely phenomenal. There's been something on my mind, I think, about this main event and stuff that Yair Rodriguez has been saying during the week. You know, he came out, I believe, on Ariel's show and said that he was told that this fight for him is a kind of a number one contenders fight. And, you know, look, it's not the first time that it's happened, and it won't be the last time it happens, but we're talking about two guys here that don't deserve to be in the number one contenders fight right now at this stage in their career. Both guys coming off a loss. Yes, off a loss for a very good competitor. But when we're talking about number one contenders in the featherweight division right now, I mean, how could you not talk about Josh Emmett, and how could you not talk about Arnold Allen? And I just, you know, it's something that's happened in the past. It's something that's going to happen in the future. But the UFC seems to want to just push these marketable figures into title fights. And I don't know why it upset. I'm not like completely angry, but it rubbed me up the wrong way when I heard Yair talking about that, because I just think it's massively, massively disrespectful, and it kind of takes away from the fight game itself and what we know in the fight game used to be. Because what's your reward for winning 8 or 9 in a row? What, getting fucking pushed back into the back of the queue so we can give two guys on a losing streak a chance to fight for the title? One has already done that already. We've seen Brian Ortega get in there and you know, he almost did it, but almost doesn't get you the title shot. You know, Yair went in there and probably lost to the second best featherweight in the division, and that was Max Holloway in his last fight. But look, that's something that I had to say, and that's something that I had to get off my chest before we talk about the actual fight itself, because the situation that these fighters find themselves in right now is not their fault. They have to go in there and they have to do their job, and they're contracted to fight. Whatever the UFC decides to do with them after that is up to the UFC. But the fight itself is one that I'm confident, and I'm sure the guys are confident in as well, is that, you know, you kind of would be a little bit hesitant to be overconfident on how fights are going to go, but this fight is certainly going to deliver, and it's that fight that you can feel the confidence that it is going to be a barn burner. It is going to deliver. It is going to be exciting. And there's two extremely, extremely great fighters that are going to be competing in the main event in Ortega and Rodriguez on Saturday. I was going to say a Saturday night, but we're actually being treated to an early card. You know, Harry is delighted over there. I know they deserve it in Europe. We're getting 2 in a row right now. Myself and Spencer will be up early and eating our breakfast, watching some fights, and I'm not too upset at that either. I'm going to go to you first, Harry, and just give me your thoughts on the fight itself, the situation we find ourselves in with these two fighters. Alex Volkanovski's fresh off his title win over Max Holloway in the third fight, the trilogy. The division is all up in the air right now. We don't know whether the champion wants to stick around. We don't know whether the champion wants to move up. What's your assessment on everything, Harry?
If I could just wade in on the meritocracy point, because that's essentially what you're talking about, right? This seems to be something that is proliferated in many cards, and actually, I think we'll talk about this a little bit more in the co-main event, right? Michelle Waterson and Amanda Lemos is probably, if Michelle Waterson wins, that's probably her getting a title shot, right? Or her being extremely close to a title shot. She's somebody that the UFC puts a lot of stock into and really wants to be a thing, right? It feels to me as though there is, and I think it was Shawnee who said this previously, but it feels as though there's like an airlock on that top three. And when you're in there, something gargantuan has to happen to get you out of there, right? Now, at 155, it's a little bit different because of the plethora of skilled fighters in that division. It's like the top 5, maybe, or the top 4 or whatever. But to me, it's a real detriment to the sport, and it's a real detriment to the fighters. Because like you said, if I'm Arnold Allen riding a 9-fight win streak, or if I was Leon Edwards riding a 9-10 fight win streak, right? What more? What's the point in me doing this thing? You know, like the whole point you get into this is to be a champion. These fighters believe that they're the best in the world, or they believe they have the potential to be the best in the world, given, you know, the right circumstances and all of the things. So why is it that you go out and you tell them you need to win some fights? They go and win more fights than most people have won in the entire division in a row. And then you're like, yeah, but this guy has a really nice haircut and a cool Instagram profile. Oh, this guy throws flashy things and sometimes gets fucked up. We like him. Sorry. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to shell in on a couple of things. The first is, I don't think either of these are really great fighters either. The really great fighter in this division is Alexander Volkanovski, and then we can work down our tiers from there. You know, Max Holloway.
I think Volkanovski is quite exceptionally, and I think his greatness does take away from a lot of the fighters in this division, including Max Holloway, which we did see in that fight too. I think, you know, for lack of a better term, I say great fighters, but it has to be said, these two fighters are top of the chain. They find themselves at the top of the chain in the featherweight division, but I mean, they're quite a bit away from the champion at this stage, as are a lot of the rest of the fighters in the division too. I mean,
the thing I'll say is we don't know that. We know that these two are quite away from the division. I think if Yair Rodriguez does win this fight, I think Alexander Volkanovski probably gets him out of there in a couple of rounds. We saw with Brian Ortega that, you know, you have to be cautious because Brian Ortega has that nuclear bomb, and it's called, he's going to find your neck from anywhere. And if he catches it, I mean, Volkanovski explicitly told how tight that choke was and how tight those positions were. And, you know, it was, eyes were narrowing and he was starting to see the lights fade and all of this stuff. And, you know, I'm sure, I mean, Spence, you've done a little bit of grappling. Ian and I have done a little bit more grappling. I don't know if either of you have ever been put out by a choke, but the way he just...
That's it. It's exactly it. It's the darkness closes in on you and it gets a little bit quieter. It gets a little quieter, and then that's it. You're like, you're looking up into the air. We've seen that many times inside the octagon as well. Not a nice feeling.
100% not a nice feeling. And Volkanovski was on the brink of that, on the absolute brink.
But so then we were just talking about how close, and I do apologize for keeping interrupting you, but when we're talking about someone who is real close, like Ortega was in that fight with Volkanovski, and then in the same breath calling him not a great fighter. But yeah, he did probably come closest to anybody that we've seen so far in the UFC beating Volkanovski, apart from Max Holloway, maybe by decision.
Yeah, so I think where I'd argue that, and I think this is kind of where my really great fighter thing comes from, putting the champion in 10 seconds of danger in comparison to essentially being outclassed for 24 minutes and 50 seconds. I mean, yes, you can make the highlight reels of Ortega jumping on the neck, and the triangle wasn't as close. It wasn't anywhere near as close as the guillotine.
No, it was all the guillotine for me, for sure.
Right, right. But like, that to me is like saying, well, Buster Douglas is an amazing fighter because he landed a shot on Mike Tyson. You know, like, these are the similar things that we're talking about. And I think it's important. This is not me being disrespectful in any way or shape or form to Brian Ortega or Yair Rodriguez. I just think that it's really important as analysts and as media members that we try to categorize fighters as they actually are, because something that Shawnee and I have been talking about a lot is the gateway to being an elite MMA fighter, or even just a high-level MMA fighter, a UFC-level MMA fighter, whatever that means these days. And the answer to that is being truly well-rounded. Well, let me tell you, Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega are not truly well-rounded, right? They're just not. So can we really call them really great fighters? I think the answer is no. And that's not me being pedantic or, just unnecessarily picking synonym wars with you. I just think when we look at
what do you call them then if you don't call them great fighters? Average fighters? The third and the fifth ranked in the UFC?
But I think they're good fighters. I think they're good fighters, right? But look at somebody that's coming up. Look at Arnold Allen, right? His fight against Sadiq Youssef. He had a bit of grappling. He showed some really great anti-grappling. He showed some good striking. He showed great footwork. In the Dan Hooker fight, he didn't need any grappling. You look at Movsar Evloev, right? That seems pretty fucking well-rounded to me, Like, I think that, and this is kind of why I labor this point to come all the way back to your point about the meritocracy thing, which is we saying that everyone else in the division is so far away from Alexander Volkanovski. Well, we don't fucking know that because we're seeing the same names turned around in the washing machine and passed out to whatever. Like,
we can blame Max Holloway a little bit for that because he kept beating everybody. It's crazy.
Well, but it's not even Max's fault. I'm going to jump in. That's not Max's fault. And so I wrote about this today for a piece that'll come out on Friday on OSDB Sports, talking about this exact thing. And I don't think it's Max's fault. Max is going to do. There's no reason why Max isn't going to take those fights. He wants to be in the spot that he was in a couple of weeks ago at UFC 276. The problem is the UFC matchmaking, and it's as Harry said, and as he and Sean and we've all talked about, right? You get that group of names, and then everybody else has to get fed through that meat grinder, through that wood chipper. Where if you're Calvin Kattar and you go out and get those 2 good wins in 2020, they then turn around and say, okay, now you have to beat Max Holloway. Well, nobody's beaten Max Holloway in the last 7 years other than Alexander Volkanovski. So what are we doing? We're just creating situations. It's honestly, I want Yair Rodriguez, like from a fan perspective, I want Yair Rodriguez to win this weekend so that we don't have Brian Ortega still sitting there at the top of the division as a roadblock to these up-and-coming talents that we have. Give Yair his shot, tell Brian Ortega to go back to the back of the line for a little bit, and let's move some of these young guys up. It's a matchmaking thing that they've gotten into in every division except for a couple. The only one that I can think of where they haven't is women's flyweight, where they've just let whoever's next in line fight Val, which is really the way it should be. Like, instead of putting
that's the way it always was.
These...
That's kind of the way we came up watching fights, isn't it? People who are getting rewarded for going on win streaks and working their way up the rankings. I'd even go one further than that with what you said, Spencer, about Yair, is that even if Yair does win, I'd say fuck that, because you're only on a 1 fight win streak then, and give it to Josh Emmett or give it to Arlen Allen, or let them fight and let the winner of that maybe get the title shot.
I think Josh Emmett has done enough. We all agree that Arnold has done enough, and if Volk is going to be out for a long period of time, I mean, if you're those two guys, right? Like you're at mixed decisions here. If you're Josh Emmett, you want Brian Ortega to win because you think, okay, that's my path to a title shot. But if Volk's going to be out for a while, then Josh Emmett's probably going to have to get one more, and it'll probably be Arnold Allen, which, hey, fine. At least then that guy gets the next title shot. It shouldn't have to. If it's Josh Emmett versus Max Holloway, I will just fall over on the floor. When we do this, when we do that preview, I will just sit here like this the whole time.
Yeah, that's definitely
just this guy, this emoji.
Yeah, I guess look at it. It's a weird way to kind of start it off. It was on my mind, and I was very eager to get your guys's. And I didn't mean to be too argumentative with you, Harry, but I mean, it's like, okay, I'm looking at it. Where is that? If we're going to say that these guys aren't good fighters, and then we're going to credit Alex Volkanovski for what he's done to these fighters as well. I mean, it's kind of burning the candle at both ends, in my opinion. But I think the basis at the point that we all agree on is that this should not be labeled as the #1 contender fight in the featherweight division. But sadly, it's probably what we're going to hear over the next couple of days, one way or another. I do agree with Spencer in saying that, a win for Ortega, probably that's not going to get Alex Volkanovski out of the bed. I think some fresh challenge is what he wants right now, whether it be in the featherweight division or whether it be in the lightweight division. I think it should remain in the featherweight division for now. because the lightweight division itself is a complete mess at the minute. So, I mean, let's kind of break into the nooks and crannies of this actual fight as well, because two good fighters going at it, two well-matched fighters going at it. How do you see it going down, Harry?
So I'll just round out that point, and just to be explicit, like, I'm certainly not saying they're not good fighters, right? I'm definitely not saying that whatsoever. And I think that both fighters are excellent in their own wheelhouses. I just think when we need to be more cognizant of how we're presenting these fighters in terms of the pantheon of MMA globally, right? People are going to watch this show.
Yeah, I know, but we can't be doing it overly the wrong way either, as well, where we're overcompensating. No, that's okay, but that's the beauty of it, because this is the basis of opinion, isn't it?
Absolutely, but I think it's important for us to label fighters correctly, and I'm not being rude, I'm not being disrespectful, I'm not being mean, I'm not talking from, I mean, I'm talking of my own opinion, obviously, but I'm not talking from an emotional standpoint. I'm just saying, if we can all agree that MMA is about the entry to MMA means you must be well-rounded, well, then we have to ask questions of these two fighters specifically. But let me lead that into the breakdown of the fights. So Brian Ortega, up until the Chang Sung Jung fight, was a guy who was finding his way to submissions. There were some fights that he was absolutely losing, and he found his way to a choke of some form, whether that be a triangle or a guillotine or a rear naked. Then he comes out and he fights Chang Sung Jung, and he looks like a different animal, right? His footwork is much better. He's patient. He's actually setting up shots. He's using his footwork to lay traps. And then he's banging TKZ with all sorts of right hands. He looks like, let's not blow the boat out too much, but he looks like he's gone and he's learned the basics of the Mexican style of boxing, and he's employing it, right? Now, the Korean Zombie is a guy that will absolutely happily walk you down. He's not going to try and shoot for your hips because a guillotine is there. And frankly, I don't think we want to put Brian Ortega on our back and play down there too much, because that's dangerous as well. So Brian Ortega was not allowed to look good, but it was a style and a matchup that meant that he was able to employ the skills that he'd been working on, right? Yair Rodriguez, again, sort of an up and down fighter, right? Wins against guys that he absolutely should win against, BJ Penn, etc. The fight against Frankie Edgar, I was actually there live, and it was a hellacious beatdown, a horrendous beatdown. And I actually one of the reasons I went to that fight card was because I was really high on Yair Rodriguez, right? Coming from a kickboxing style, does all the flashy stuff. I love all that stuff. And then you got to see, okay, there's a big ceiling here. There's a big, big ceiling here. And that's, you look amazing on the feet, but what happens when it doesn't go your way? And I think in Max Holloway's fight, we saw a little bit more of that, right? Something that Yair does is the flash is great when he's in his own range. And in his own range is actually quite far out of the pocket. And Max Holloway does a great job of using the pressure footwork that we're so accustomed to pushing him behind the tram lines and forcing him to be a little bit claustrophobic. Yair likes to use his hands in bunches. When he's pushing forward, his combinations flowing from kicks to punches, body, head, leg kicks, high kicks, they're gorgeous to watch, beautiful to watch. But when he's a little bit pressured and a little bit claustrophobic, things get a little bit more desperate, and he's looking for things to get you off him. And a lot of those things are big, flashy, high octane, high impact shots. What did Max Holloway do? Well, he saw that coming from 6 miles away. And a lot of the times he was landing jabs to the chest or just small shots, and Yair was falling over. In the third round specifically, Max Holloway gets on top, grapevines the leg, is looking for shots, landing a ton of shots. Yair does nothing to get up. He does nothing to get his hips back to the mat. He just accepts bottom position. Max takes his back. We're looking at a grappling situation. I think the grappling situations lasts about 1 minute 50, 2 minutes, that sort of realm. If Brian Ortega finds those similar spots, we could be packing up and going home, right? To me, the thing that I question in this fight, as always, is range, cadence, and how the judges are going to see it. I think that Yair Rodriguez hits harder. I think he's the better athlete. I think he has more speed than Brian Ortega. But at the moment, Brian Ortega still, to me, is a little bit of an unknown quantity. He's had a new team. He's had a little bit of time with them now, 3 fights, this being his 4th fight. We don't truly know what we're going to see from Brian Ortega, right? In the Chang Sung Jung fight, we saw some actual setups to takedowns. We saw ducking, single legs. We saw him shoot for things. We saw him try to set things up in a way that wasn't reactionary. My question is, what's been learned from the Alexander Volkanovski fight, and how has Brian Ortega rounded himself out into a more well-rounded mixed martial artist, and how does he employ that against Yair Rodriguez? Because if he can pressure him, walk through the fire a little bit, you don't want to be throwing crazy amounts of kicks at Brian Ortega, because he'll catch them and he'll run you down. Yeah. You don't want to be throwing too much in the pocket and exposing your hips. You don't want to be off balance against Brian Ortega. But the other problem with Brian Ortega is he likes getting into a war. And if he gets into a war, he's going to walk on a ton of shots and he's going to move back to the foundations of what his game is. And the foundations of what his game is are what we saw when he was growing up in the UFC, which is reactionary shots and reactionary movements. And against Yair Rodriguez, that's danger.
Sure is. And those are excellent points there. And do you know what? I was thinking a lot of similar things myself. The main points for me looking at these 2 fights, and I'm going to get your opinion now, Spencer, on what Harry has said and what your thoughts on the fight are. For me, it's what Harry said about the use of the kicks for Yair Rodriguez, where he will probably be hesitant in doing that. So will he find himself in boxing range? And we've seen Ortega has improved his boxing a little bit. The fact that Brian Ortega is more of a guy who will jump on a mistake for a submission rather than use his wrestling to get to the fight down, I think will suit Yair Rodriguez. Now, I think he'd be foolish not to go along those lines against Yair in this fight and at least give him something extra to talk about. And what everyone said about being well-rounded and stuff, I completely agree. But I think we have seen some increments in Ortega's game where he is putting in the work to try and make himself a little bit more well-rounded. And I think he has done that more so than what we've seen so far from Yair Rodriguez.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, the work he's done, this is his 3rd fight with this crew. He stripped everything down, right? The crew that was with him throughout the run in the UFC, all the way up to the Max fight, was the same crew. And after that fight, he said, everybody's gone. The only person that stuck around that he kept on was Henner Gracie, who has been with him since he was a teenager. Everybody else is new. It's Paul Herrera. It's Dr. Jason Park. It's his manager, Tiki Goshen. It's a whole new team that he's working with to get this stuff figured out. Because as he said, and I talked to him after that Max fight, he said, look, there were fundamental things I didn't know. And so I think that's why the Korean Zombie fight looks so different, right? Not to mention the fact that he shaved his beautiful long hair. He just showed things that we had never seen from him before. And it was fundamental, and it was just the basics, but it looked so good because it was so different than what we were used to from Brian Ortega, which was a lot of just instinct. He's a very instinctual fighter. And I think that's the thing that makes him both tricky to kind of project and figure out what he's going to do from fight to fight, but it's also the thing that makes him insanely dangerous, right? He's getting dominated in that fight with Volkanovski, and all it takes is Volk throwing one lazy naked kick that he half catches, hits him with a left hand, and chases him to the ground, and he's on the neck, and now we're all thinking we've got a new champion. Been dominated all the way to that point, and he just needs that 10 seconds to get on your neck, and it could be game over. So I do think that Yair has to be really particular about setting up his kicks, figuring out where he's using them, the range he's using them at, the level he's using them to. The other thing with Yair, and it goes to Harry's point about his creativity and his wildness, he recognizes that there are times where he needs to dial that shit back, where he needs to stop being wild and crazy Yair Rodriguez and be a little more technical and stick to the game plan a little more and just fight sort of not within himself, but a little more confined. Still do a lot of the stuff that got you to where you are. You're not going to just all of a sudden not throw kicks and not throw flying attacks. But to me, it's similar to when Max Holloway was coming up to then getting on his run, right? he dialed back the spinning attacks. He dialed back the flying knees and all of that and said, look, I've got pressure, I've got hands, I've got length. Let's start with that as the foundation, use that to as good effect as I can, and then we can add in the other pieces on the edges. Similar to what Harry's always said about Umar Nurmagomedov, right? Go out, get the job done, and then we play in round 3, and then we have fun later. I think this is a fight where Yair Rodriguez can come out and be really effective by just keeping it as simple as he can to the things that he's really good at, because I think offensively, he is more polished and more sort of precise with things than Brian Ortega. The big question mark and the big thing that's always the monkey wrench is that Ortega just needs he needs 2 seconds of your neck being exposed and it's done. It's I said it to Harry earlier today. It's sort of like Derek Lewis at heavyweight, right? There's no point where you can count him out because you could be absolutely beating the face off of him, as we've seen in these championship fights that he's lost, and he just needs one chance. And if you give it to him, more often than not, he's taking your neck home.
That's it, and that could be the deal breaker in this fight. While I've been thinking about this fight, I think about it and I'm like, Ortega is going to win, and then I think about it another time, and then I'm like, no, maybe Yair might do this. And this is a kind of a fight that you don't really know what's going to happen unless you get to see maybe a half a round or something like that, and we see what these guys are going to bring to the table. Like, you know, in defeat in his last fight, Harry Rodriguez did take some rounds off of Max Holloway, you know, so I think that cannot be snuffed at as well, which is not an easy thing to do. You know, the cards are a little bit all over the place, but you could have scored, I think judges would have scored 4 separate rounds in favor of Rodriguez on at least one of their cards throughout that fight. I think me personally, I may have only had it 4-1 to Holloway, but there was a lot of close rounds in it. So I think what Spencer was talking about there, and yet Rodriguez being a little bit more patient, being a little bit less flashy, that kind of paid dividends to him in that Holloway fight. And like Spencer said as well, he's going to have to fucking do that here against Ortega as well, because if he doesn't and he does throw something stupid, you don't want to be throwing a spinning kick and find Brian Ortega on your back, because that's going to equal bad news, isn't it?
100% agree. I think everything that you've just said is perfect, right? And the reason why I think this fight is going to be brilliant to watch is because we're going to see strengths in the other's deficiencies, right? Like, if this goes to the mat, it's a long old night for Yair Rodriguez, especially if he can't get up and especially if there's plenty of time to work. If Yair Rodriguez is able to push Brian Ortega back, let's talk about the Max fight a little bit. There were lots of push kicks to the face. There were lots of high kicks. And then there were lots of oblique kicks and open palm kicks, like open foot kicks, where he's opening his foot to show the sole of the foot sideways to Max Holloway and stamping on the leg that way. The reason that's effective is because it's really hard to catch. The moment you go to catch that, Yair has an ability to rotate his knee back inside, loosening your grip, and then he can, do the things and escape, right? I think if I'm Yair Rodriguez, I'm first of all getting in there and really having a look at Brian Ortega's range, because I think he's a longer fighter than he seems, right? Really long legs, quite a long reach, quite a large wingspan, and he uses it to good effect, right? I think I'm going to be attacking low calf kicks. And I think I'm going to be attacking high kicks off the reaction of the low calf kick. Something that Yair does so beautifully is he no-sells kicks amazingly well. Amazingly well. So if I batter that low calf kick enough, that low Achilles kick, and you see Brian make the read and start to reach for it, well, the head kick's going to be there. And then let's batter him with a few head kicks, right? I think if I'm going to be throwing spinning attacks, I'm going to do so when I have Brian Ortega moving backwards. Maybe mid-combination, late end of the combination. Something that Yair did so beautifully as well in the Max fight is he goes low kick, body shot, head shot. Low kick, head shot, body shot. Headshot, low kick, body shot. So he has you guessing and he has you peppering at such different angles, and he's coming at such a speed and he's coming forward with such momentum. You have no choice but to respect that movement, right? And if you don't, he's going to catch you with all of them. And one thing Yair Rodriguez doesn't know how to do is throw anything but 90% shots. And that's why I think we saw him take rounds against Max Holloway, because he was landing impactfully with everything he threw, right? Max was doing more of the volume stuff, right, in a lot of those rounds. But we must understand, as Shawnee and you and Spencer have labored the point on so much, it's impactful shots that win rounds. And a lot of the stuff that Yair was hitting Max with was very impactful, right? Now, as the rounds moved on, I think Max's pressure started to force Yair to wilt a little bit and second guess himself and all of these things. Can Ortega do that? I don't know, man. I don't know.
It's going to be interesting to find out, and we'll find out early on Saturday. We won't have to wait too long. We won't have to wait as long as we normally have. But, you know, two women who are also looking to make an impact in the strawweight division is Michelle Waterson and Amanda Lemos. I know, Harry, you've alluded to maybe the winner maybe getting pushed into a title shot. I want to say Zhang Weili. I want to say Marina Rodriguez as well are there in the mix. I think that this is definitely a push from the UFC to kind of catapult one of these women in to title contention. And, you know, Michelle Waterson has been there and done that. She's tried, and, you know, she hasn't got the title. She's been close to getting her shot. I think this is more so a chance for Amanda Lemos to kind of get back into contention and give her day in the sunshine. Obviously, she picked up that disappointing defeat against Jessica Andrade. It was a standing arm triangle choke, I believe, that finished her in that fight. Spencer, what's your thoughts on this fight? I'm going to be completely honest here, and I said it to you I mentioned it to you, Harry, during the week. This is a fight that, you know, I'll be interested in looking at, but I'm not, at the same time, not that interested in looking at, because it doesn't really do anything for me, and there's not that much jeopardy in it, as we like to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a little bit, just in terms of what you said, of one of these women is going to move forward into that kind of top 10 upper tier pack, which continues to grow in this division as Jessica Andrade comes back, as Carlos Esparza moves into the championship range, as we get an opening with Joanna Jędrzejczyk retiring. Michelle Waterson is certainly someone that the UFC has pushed and has looked to see get into that spot. She hasn't gotten there thus far. I don't know necessarily that a win over Lemos gets her all the way there, but it certainly would put her in a position to face one of those other top names. You can see that fight being a fight night main event, or the third fight on a pay-per-view where it's, you know, then the stakes are there, and then it's the number one contender as we get things figured out in this division. I think for Lemos, this is sort of the like bounce back test, if that makes sense, right? She didn't pass the Jessica Andrade main event test, and now it's the like, okay, this almost feels to me like let's figure out where your floor is again, because the two good wins at the start of last year are over Lavinia Souza and Montserrat Conejo, who have, you know, limited experience in the UFC. Both good victories for Lemos, don't get me wrong, but then it's a split decision against Angie Hill. We know where Angie stands in the division, what her sort of position and role in this weight class has been. Now we're going to figure out, is Amanda Lemos number 10 in that 7 to 10 range, or is she somebody that's sort of 10 through 12? And so that's the part of this that I want to see. I think it's an interesting style matchup between a fighter that has a whole whack of power in Amanda Lemos and somebody that's going to look to move and sort of mix things up in Michelle Waterson, who can strike from the outside, who can grapple a little bit, who can wrestle a little bit, who has very good conditioning. Those are the pieces of it that I'm looking forward to. I don't think it necessarily carries, you know, as much jeopardy and as much significance as some of these fights on this card do, or carry as many big questions that I'm looking forward to seeing answers to as some of the other fights on this card. But it's certainly still an intriguing matchup.
Yeah, indeed it is. And you know what? I'd look at this one, Harry, as a more favorable matchup maybe for Lemos than the one over Andrade. You know, Andrade is obviously known as a powerful striker, but also a powerful grappler as well. And you know, Michelle Waterson does have that in her back pocket, but doesn't tend to want to use it all that much. And to be fair, it's probably not her strongest aspect of her game. Like Spencer said, you would expect Michelle Waterson to look to kind of outpoint Lemos on the feet here throughout this fight. But as we've seen in previous fights with Lemos, she's got some serious power. And if she can connect, it could be big trouble for Waterson here.
Yeah, I think this is going to come down to impactful versus non-impactful striking, to be honest. Like, Michelle Waterson finds her way to the cage quite often, right? The circular motion that she has, and she throws the side kicks, and, you know, she looks for her high kicks and she looks for blitzes in and whatever. But against Amanda Lemos, who can cut the cage off pretty well, right? That's going to be something that's going to leave her under pressure. I don't know that Waterson's going to have enough power to really dissuade Lemos. Like, look at the way that Lemos fought Andrade. She wasn't scared of the power. She was happy to stand and trade. She was happy to throw shots and give shots. So I don't know what Waterson's going to be able to do, bar landing, you know, big head kicks or whatever it is, to really dissuade Lemos. I think this is probably going to be, as Spencer said, a pretty one-sided Lemos fight. I would be interested to see whether Waterson chooses to grapple a little, to see whether we just test that boundary a little bit. Let's see whether we can drain some of that gas tank. I was impressed with Lemos and her gas tank in the Andrade fight. I mean, obviously it went the way it went, right? These things are fine. But I expected the gas tank to be tested a little bit more, given the pressure style that Andrade brings. And Lemos looked fine, right? Now, Spencer already touched on it. The conditioning of Michelle Waterson and the footwork, especially of Michelle Waterson, if she gets her rhythm going, might cause problems. But I find it difficult to think that Lemos isn't going to find a shot inside 15 minutes. And that shot, if she finds 3 of them, she wins the fight.
100%. Yeah, you couldn't have summed it up any better. Let's move on to Li Jingliang versus Muslim Salikov in the welterweight division. Li coming in after getting absolutely and literally manhandled by Khamzat Chimaev. Hey, these things happen in MMA, guys. You know what I mean? So Salikov himself is on a bit of a run right now, coming into this fight with recent wins over Alessio Zaleski and Francisco Trinaldo in his last fight last year. Spencer, how do you see this one going down? You know, Li Jingliang, always in exciting fights, always throws the kill shots. Didn't happen for him the last time. He'll be going out here with a point to prove, won't he?
I think so. And my answer is one that I'm going to steal from Harry from week to week. And it's that I don't know, but that's what intrigues me, right? Like, we're going to figure out if Muslim Salikov at 38 years old is actually somebody that's kind of a dark horse in this division, and this is going to sound bad, but somebody we have to take seriously. Right now, I don't necessarily take him seriously as a contender, because as good as wins over Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos is, easy for me to say, and Harry's favorite fighter, Francisco Trinaldo, those aren't top 15 victories. Those aren't the wins that are necessarily going to move you forward in this division into some of the bigger matchups. Now, Li Jingliang, we're getting a little closer, right? He's been in there with a bunch of top 15 guys. He was one of the tests for Khamzat, as you said, which he failed terribly. Khamzat passed in flying colors. That's what this is. I don't know if he's great, but if he goes out and beats the Leech on Saturday, we've got to talk about him. He's got to get an opportunity against somebody that's got a number next to their name. And from there, who knows? Does this turn into 8 wins, 9 wins, 10 wins, and somebody that's making a run? Like, is he primed now for a Glover Teixeira 42-year-old title run? We're going to find out.
We certainly are. Harry, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that. If you'd like to come in on that, fire ahead.
Sure. So I think I'm going to lean on the side of the more technical fighter for the most part, unless there's a massive athletic disadvantage. And I don't think there is here. I think Zaleski dos Santos was a really interesting fight because Salikov forced dos Santos to fight a technical fight. And that's something that we don't see very often from Zaleski dos Santos. I think the counter style that Salikov has and the footwork that he has is going to be a problem for Li Jingliang. Whether Li Jingliang can just raw bastard this fight and walk through some of those shots and get to Salikov? I don't know. But Salikov hits very hard. So does Li Jingliang. And I think if Li Jingliang goes with a game plan to disrupt the rhythm of Salikov, this could get very interesting very quickly. If he doesn't, and he's looking to just outpoint him and land his shots when he finds them, I think Salikov will likely set the pace and take the fight.
Yeah, very well said. Moving on to the next one in the featherweight division, organized chaos, absolute madness, insanity inside the octagon. That's what we're going to see when Shane Burgos takes on Charles Jourdain and the main card here. I'm going to stick with you, Harry. I see you rubbing your hands together. I see Spencer chowing at the bit to get in there as well, but we'll go to you first, Harry. This is fight of the night contender easily. I think the only challenge to this fight being fight of the night would be the main event, in my opinion, and I think it still might get it. Two absolute animals going in there, two guys looking to kind of stake their claim, I guess, in the top 10 in the featherweight division too, and it's a good test for Jourdain coming in here.
Mate, what a fucking banger this is. What a fucking banger this is. For me personally, forget all that Trinaldo talk. Shane Burgos is a guy that I adore to watch, right? Forget all the well-roundedness, forget all the technical whatever, forget it. It doesn't matter. Shane Burgos goes in and everything is mean intentions. Everything is, he is signing every single shot with blood and he is leaving it on your chin. I think this fight for me, I feel like Burgos is the bigger man. I feel like Burgos has, although you may not see it that often, the superior head movement and the superior footwork. I think if I'm Charles Jourdain, I'm following the game plan that we've seen work really well against Shane Burgos, and that's beat the body and beat it early. Invest in that body, invest in it heavily, and you're going to have to walk through some fire to do it. But if you can take that body away and you can sap on that gas tank, the head movement becomes slower and he's easier to find. But Shane Burgos, hear me out. This is going to sound fucking wild, but hear me out, right? In the same way that Max Holloway is a freight train, and if you allow him in the first and half of the second round, if you allow him to dictate and build his pressure, there is very little coming back. It is so hard to turn the tide. And I think Shane Burgos is similar. Obviously, not the same caliber of fighter as Max Holloway, but he is the same. That if you allow him to build his confidence and stoke the engines and get those fires going, good fucking luck turning him away. The question I have for Shane Burgos specifically is, where is that chin? He's wearing a lot of damage in all of his UFC fights. All of them. The Emmett fight, the Mr. Finland fight, all of them. All of them, he has come out with big lumps, big bruises, big cuts. Charles Jourdain is somebody that's definitely going to test that chin again. So where's Shane Burgos? That's my question.
It's going to be interesting to find out because Jourdain has been on a hell of a tear recently. He seems to have found himself as a fighter. Spencer, I know that you were speaking to him this week ahead of the fight.
Yeah, he's dialed in. He's clicked in a different way than he was coming up. Obviously, being Canadian, he's someone I've talked to throughout his career and built a little bit of a relationship with. And we talked before this one, and I just frankly said, like, you're in a different headspace. You're in a different approach to this. And he said, like, yep. And jokingly, as he does, because he's playful, he said, I stopped going to the self-help section in the bookstore. All the time that I spent in my head trying to figure all this stuff out, asking myself all these questions of why am I not X, Y, and Z? I had all these gray hairs. That's why I shave my head now. Now I just go out and I have fun. I'm 26. Like, what have I got to worry about? I'm 26. I'm doing what I love. And that was the Andre Ewell fight. And then that was, jump into Ilia Topuria, but that fight didn't happen. And then go out and choke out Lando Venata, and just an absolutely dominant performance, right? Like, thinking this is going to be a big test for this kid, 26 years old, against a guy that's been in there and The record isn't the best, but we know the quality, again, as we talk about all the time on this show. And Jourdain just hits him with a left hand and grabs the neck, and we're done. And like Lando has no outs, and Jourdain makes all the right moves with him. I said, you seem kind of pissed off afterwards of like really wanting that one. He's like, yeah, I want these motherfuckers to know that, sure, take me down. I got something for you. I'm a black belt. I'm legit. I know what I'm doing down here. So I may not be where I'm best at wrestling, but sure, you want to play on the ground? Okay. And in terms of style, in terms of what Harry's talking about with this fight and the way sort of the momentum of it plays, this is so interesting to me because he's 100% right about Burgos. And the thing with Charles Jourdain is if you don't get him out of there, that kid is not going to stop coming. Like, part of the reason he's never all that upset about decision losses is because if we went more, I'm going to beat you. Like, if you just give me more time, I am going to wear you down to the point that you will not keep going. And so he's learning to sort of ramp that up a little bit and get going a little faster. And sort of, you can't just wait for round 3 and round 4 and 5 that aren't there. But this is a kid that if Shane Burgos doesn't get him out of there, he is 100% going to be in his face, testing that chin, testing that body, testing everything he's got, because he's locked in a different way than he was prior to those last couple of fights. And it's really interesting to see from a kid that had 2 belts in TKO and has all the confidence in the world.
I wonder what the odds are on a Charles Jourdain sub.
Yeah, it'd be good. He showed that he has that in that Lando Fanata fight. I mean, I forgive him. This is his 10th UFC fight at 26 years of age, which is absolutely crazy. And you know what? I'm fucking in my mid 30s. I still haven't found myself. So it's okay, Charles. That's taking you a little bit of time, man. Give yourself a little bit of leeway there, but by all means, he seems to have found himself in there at this stage. And I think we've seen that. And I think this is the perfect test at the perfect time for him right now, because I think if he comes in with the same attitude, the same mindset, that Shane Burgos is kind of a fighter that is there for the taking.
2 things. Charles Jourdain by TKO, DQ, or sub on Bet365 is plus 333. So get your money in if you like it. And the other thing that you just said, Ian, he touched on that when we spoke of like, look, I'm 26 and everybody else that's in this division, I'm younger than most of them, but I have more fights and I have more experience. So like, wait till I get to 27, 28, 29. And now I've got, 25 fights under my belt and 15 of them are in the UFC against the best caliber guys. He is somebody that I think is right on the cusp. And if he gets a win here, he joins that pack, maybe not quite where Arnold Allen is, but where Movsar Evloev is, where Bryce Mitchell is, where Ilya Topuria is, as these are guys to watch for in this division that is far from cleared out.
100%.
One thing I'll just tack on to that, Ian, is let me tell you who you are. One of the best to goddamn fucking do it.
There you go, son. There you go. I love it. Yeah, that's it, man. I mean, even if he doesn't get the win in there, it's not to be all and end all for Charles Jourdain either. Like, in 4 years' time, he's only going to be 30 years of age. He's going to have a bag of experience. But I definitely think that we're going to be talking about Charles Jourdain on this show, on this podcast, whatever you want to call it, for many years to come, win, lose, or draw against Shane Burgos. I'm excited to see his progression. Another fight that I'm also excited to see somewhat is the return of Miesha Tate, the 125-pound division against Lauren Murphy. She'll make her debut in the flyweight division against Lauren Murphy, the former bantamweight champion, an OG of women's MMA, one of the pioneers of mixed martial arts, women's mixed martial arts and mixed martial arts in general, in my opinion. I think her feud and the stuff that happened with her and Rousey kind of set the bar for women's MMA and kind of set a fire under it somewhat. The rivalry stemmed back to Strikeforce into the UFC and onto Tough. And credit to Miesha Tate. She took a couple of years off. She had a kid. She's back. She had the fire in her belly. Had 2 kids, excuse me. It didn't work out all that well for her in the bantamweight division. She's decided to make the move down to the flyweight division. And that's the question I'll ask you, Harry. Do you think it's the right decision for her to make at this stage in her career? She's 35 now. She obviously has that hot fire in her belly to get one last crack at the title. Sometimes it can be, and especially in this division, it can be careful what you wish for.
Fuck weight cutting, first of all. Second of all, I don't think we're going to know is the honest answer until we see her in there, right? I cannot even begin to imagine what it's like to go and have 2 children and then come back and begin again, essentially, to rebuild your body, rebuild that vehicle, rebuild your athletic potential, and to then go and cut more weight than you were cutting previously, right? I honestly can't tell you. I could not even begin to imagine. So all the props in the world for Miesha Tate for doing this, if she feels like it's the right decision for her. As I said, until we see her on the scale, and then obviously until we see her in the octagon, I don't think we're going to know what she looks like. But on the fight itself, this is kind of a tailor-made fight for Miesha Tate, right? I think she's better everywhere than Lauren Murphy. Murphy is very tough. She's very gritty. That's Miesha Tate's bread and butter, right? Miesha Tate looked fine. You know, she still looked at a solid level in her return, right? Okay, she was bested that night. That's fine. These things happen in MMA. But she didn't look out of place. She didn't look washed. She didn't look like she'd skipped a huge amount of beats. She just looked like a fighter that had probably had a couple of kids and was finding her way back to who she was. It feels to me that this matchup is a similar sort of matchup to others that we're talking about on this card, that if she goes out there and does Miesha Tate stuff, maybe she gets a late TKO, maybe she finds her way to a sub, or maybe she just finds a dominant win, then she's right in, right? Ex-title challenger at this division. We're kind of looking for challengers in this division. Why not build ex-champion, legend of the sport? Here you go, Miesha Tate.
We're not going to bitch too much about Miesha Tate getting propelled in like we did with the main event and maybe the co-main event. But I mean, you know, everything that Harry said and the way he broke this fight down was absolutely perfect to my ears as well. One thing I would add to it as well is I think the big question is, and Harry did allude to it at the start of what he was saying, was how good will Miesha Tate look at 125? Will she run out of gas? Because I know someone who's going to be, like you said, like Charles Jourdain, is going to be moving forward in the third round in this fight if it gets that far, is Lauren Murphy. And you know, if the gas tank starts to fade a little bit for Miesha Tate, this fight might get a little bit more interesting than what it appears on paper.
Yeah, if you think Lauren Murphy ain't coming into this fight with a giant fucking point to prove after her last fight, you haven't been paying attention to who Lauren Murphy is, right? The last thing we've seen of her, and the thing we keep seeing of her, is Valentina Shevchenko lighting her up and just beating her, to use one of Harry's favorite terms, all over the gaff. She's got to come out and prove something here. She's going to come out and wants to show this is my division. This is where I've been hanging out. You don't get to just come down here and jump to the front of the line. That, for me, that is exactly what this feels like. For Miesha, she can say all of the right things about my friend's the champion and I don't want to battle her. I think there's some validity to that. Like, she doesn't want to be around and even put in the possibility of facing Juliana Pena. I think the fact that Ketlin Vieira also beat the hell out of her and showed that she's not quite at that championship level at bantamweight anymore has a lot to do with it as well. And she can go and hit the fast lane to a championship opportunity. As you guys said, she goes out and beats Lauren Murphy. It's tailor-made. Shevchenko's already said, this is a fight I'd like. And the UFC will 100% happily make this fight happen later this year if Miesha Tate can go out and get a win. I think it has the possibility and the potential to look far more like Miesha's return fight against Marion Renault than it does the fight against Ketlin Vieira. And if everything sort of goes, as Harry said, the way we think it can, then this should be a good win, provided that the move to 25 isn't just wild on her body and she doesn't, look terrible on Friday on the scale.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm going to jump ahead a few fights here. We got to talk about Ricky Simon versus Jack Shore, which is buried on the undercard of a Long Island fight card. I spoke a bit, Sean, on the main podcast this week about this card, why it was matched. I think, look, I'm not going to be too argumentative on the matchup itself, but where it is, I mean, this fight should be on UFC London in 2 weeks' time, not buried on the UFC Long Island. I think that Jack Shore has done enough in this sport to deserve that opportunity to fight in front of his home fans. He doesn't like it. His dad doesn't like it. But you know what? He has to put all that into the rear view mirror because he has got Ricky Simon ahead of him. And Ricky Simon, when he is on form, can cause some problems. But he has too many hot days and he has so many hot, cold days. It's hard to know which one is going to show up. How would you see Jack Shore getting on in this fight, Harry, as a proud Welshman yourself?
I don't know is the honest answer, because skill for skill, you have to say that Jack Shore has shown, that Timur Valiev win, right? People don't know how good Timur Valiev really is, right? But we saw Jack Shore beat a superior athlete with technique, right? Okay, there was a moment where the guillotine looked pretty tight and then it looked a little bit tighter again, but he still managed to find his way out and he still managed to dominate that fight. He dropped Valiev in the end of that fight. Some of the jiu-jitsu butterfly get-ups with double unders were gorgeous. He's a guy that doesn't accept bad positions. He's a guy that's happy to wrestle. He's a guy that can land his shots. But Ricky Simon feels like a little bit of a step up. As you mentioned, if he's on, he's a brilliant, brilliant fighter in his wheelhouse, right? And the thing that I struggle with is in his wheelhouse is the same wheelhouse as Jack, And if he's on, it could be a really, really interesting fight. I think this is athleticism versus technique. You have to say, I can't say, I'm going to look at the worst Ricky Simon possible and expect that guy to come in, right? You have to say this is going to be the best Ricky Simon that comes in. And if he is, Jack best be ready to scramble and he best be ready to drop those hips to the mat and he best be ready to be looking to take dominant position at all times, because Ricky hits hard, he can shoot, he can grapple, he can wrestle, he can scramble. So can Jack. And I think this, from an analyst perspective, this is my favorite fight on the card, just because there's so many questions that are asked here. There are so many ways that this could go. And whereas I can see directions in lots of other fights, until I see this fight, I don't know how it's going to go.
Who would you give the striking advantage to, Harry? I'm thinking Ricky Simon myself. I think he probably possesses a little bit more power, so that I'd be wary of Jack Shore getting caught in the pocket here. We've seen that power against Rafael Assunção in his last fight as well.
Impactful striking is Ricky Simon all day, right? I think in the Valiev fight, we saw Jack land a picture-perfect shot to drop him, but it was also an accumulation of shots, right? He'd tested that chin a number of times. He'd worn Valiev down. He'd beat the body up. He'd beat the legs up, and then he landed his shot. Fine. I think, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in this fight, is because we're scoring this based on impactful striking. And I think I agree with you that the impactful striking leads itself to Ricky Simon. So where do we see this? Do we see Jack being forced to grapple? And are we seeing him grapple on Ricky's terms? Or are we seeing that this fight, Jack is too technical and he's going to be able to make Ricky miss? This is the beauty of this fight.
It absolutely is. I can't wait. Spencer, what are your thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, I adore the fight as well. And from the perspective of somebody that, loves prospects and loves watching fighters matriculate up the division and things like that, this is one for me that I've just been sitting here drooling over for the last week, because we know where Ricky Simon's at, but his ceiling is still fairly undefined. We know how good Jack is to be 28-0 over the course of amateur and pro combined. Just an absolutely ridiculous record that doesn't get made of it to be 16-0 as a professional, 5-0 in the UFC. Like, these things matter, folks. Please pay attention to them and understand the difficulty of that. even going back to Cage Warriors, where he fought very good opponents towards the end of that run. This to me is, we're going to find out what tier do these guys fit into for now. And then maybe a little bit of, okay, where does the ceiling rest? Ricky Simone's had a couple of those fights with some more experienced guys. He welcomed Uriah Faber back. That didn't go very well. He fought Rob Font. That didn't go very well. But he's not the first guy that was young and hungry and on the rise and got knocked back by a couple of veterans and had to regroup. This to me is, I mean, we talk about this division all the time. This is the winner of this joins that forward-moving pack of young, talented, hungry guys that are coming for some of the established veterans, the Dominic Cruzes, the Jose Aldos, the Rob Fonts, the Cody Garb, like everybody that is standing around waiting their turn and hanging out. There's a pack of young lions that are coming, and the winner of this one's going to be right near the front of that group.
The bantamweight division right now is a fucking melting pot of talent. It's like, you even mentioned Cody Garbrandt there. The fact that you can forget a fighter like Cody Garbrandt in the division is like, what is going on
Cody
here?
Garbrandt's at the resetting against Hani Yahya, which didn't happen because Ronnie got hurt, but like, former champion who was one of the faces of the UFC at that time is in the absolute reset point where he's got to win probably 4 to get anywhere close to something meaningful.
Insanity.
Give me that Jack Shaw Cody Garbrandt fight. Give me.
Ooh, I would love that. I'd take Ricky Simone Cody Garbrandt too. I'd take winner of this against Cody Garbrandt.
Yeah, let me see that.
Definitely. There's another 5 fights on the undercard, Harry. Is there any other fights on the undercard that are standing out to you, or did you like to say a few words on?
So I actually quite like Dwight Grant, Dustin Stolfus, to be honest. Not because there's a ton of jeopardy, not because these guys are going to be winning titles or whatever, but I just think it's a nice middle of the pack fight. Stolfus has had sort of an up and down record, but when he's good and when he's on and when he's in his wheelhouse, he's good. And Dwight Grant feels to me like his ceiling should be a little bit higher than we think it is, but he's a guy that just doesn't seem to be able to work himself out. He doesn't seem to be able to fight in his own range. He doesn't seem to be able to, he's throwing 75% of shots and then it's all the way out there. It's definitely connecting. He's like, lads, I'm going to pull this back now. I don't think it's there. And then, he's getting cracked with counters and whatever. But when you watch him fight, the raw materials are all there, right? Clearly a good athlete, clearly an intelligent man, but he's getting on in his age and, things have to start clicking if they're going to be clicking. And I like the matchup for seeing where Dwight Grant is and whether these things can begin to click. And that's something that I enjoy seeing. Like, as I said, these guys aren't going to be fighting for UFC titles. They're never going to be in the top 10, but these are going to be guys that we can have enjoyable progressions with, and we can watch the evolution of MMA through. Moving
up too, and it'll be interesting to see if fighting at 85 has an impact on what he's able to do and the kind of power that he brings and things like that. Because Dustin Stoltzfus 0-3 in the UFC, but the road he's had is just like, it's right. He's been put in there with 3 guys that are all better than him at what he's best at. And that's just difficult, right? You want to go out there and grapple, and they say, here's Kyle Dawkins, here's Rodolfo Vieira, and here's Gerald Meerschaert. 3 dudes that are just going to beat you at your own game. And it's like, great, I came all the way from Germany for this.
Indeed. Spencer, anything else that you're looking forward to on the prelims?
I mean, I love the light heavyweight fight between Dustin Jacoby and Da-Un Jung, 2 guys that are criminally underrated. I mean, Dustin Jacoby is 5-0-1 since coming back to the UFC. And Harry's making me, I don't like this fight face. But here's the thing. In this division, where there's a need for fresh talent and there is always opportunities, the winner of this is going to be fighting someone you are quite familiar with next time out. And so I want to see, is Dustin Jacoby just kind of the veteran that's hanging around and having a nice little run? I think Da-Un Jung has more upside, obviously, being 28, things like that. We saw him dominate Kennedy and Zechiku last time out. So I want to see that. And then the opener. Give me all of the Emily Ducote. Give me all of it. Give me all of the stocks. Give me all of the options that I can buy. I want all of them because I think she's a contender in this division in a couple of years' time. She's looked great since moving to this division. She's fought terrific competition throughout her career. Yes, there were some losses in Bellator, but they're to Alimale McFarland, one of them in a title fight, It's Christina Williams. It's Vita Artesia. Her only loss at strawweight is Kaneko Murata, who is a former Invicta champ and a UFC fighter now. She's the goods, and she's coming along, and she's putting it together to where she's arriving in the UFC at the right time for her. Everything started to sort of form together to its best, and now she gets in there with a former title challenger, a ranked fighter, and Jessica Panay. This is a chance to just hit the fast lane in this division.
Can we just remember that Da Un Jung has a draw against Sam Alvey, and I'll say nothing more.
Say no more, fam. Say no more. That's the perfect way to round out this week's podcast, I think. Shout out to Sam Alvey. Shout out to all the great fighters, and shout out to all the good fighters out there as well. And shout out to everybody who is listening to this week's show. We'll be back again. We're hoping to bring you a big UFC London preview. Fingers crossed. No discussions have been made yet, but we might try bring in a few extra faces. We'll see what happens. We'll keep you in the loop. We are pre-recording these from now on, so you are unfortunately not able to send in any live questions, but check out Spencer, Kite, Harry, and myself on Twitter. We'll be posting up this O'Neill MMA at BJJ_Harry Powell and at Spencer Kite, all on Twitter. Check us all out. Check out the Keyboard Kimura, the guys podcast. Check out the Severe Spotlight. I think there could be a couple of contenders on the card. This is something that we're going to do now, Harry. I just thought of this on the spot. You have to, who is the Severe Spotlight on ahead of this card so far? Who do you think that you're going to be writing about next week?
Charles Jourdain.
There you go. Perfect answer. That's it. We'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. All Real Nutrition Bars. Head on over there, eatallreal.com, enter the code word SevereMMA, get yourself 15% off. Proud sponsors of the preview show, proud sponsors of the main podcast show now as well. Keep it Irish, keep it real, keep it eat all real, and we'll see you the next